What if there was a country so small, most people couldn't even find it on a map, but inside its people lived one of the oldest, most mysterious genetic legacies on Earth? What if your DNA didn't just tell you where you're from, but revealed a secret migration no one talks about? A journey back into Africa, thousands of years before history began. Welcome to Djibouti. From the outside, Djibouti looks like nothing more than a dry stretch of desert. A small port nation near the Red Sea, often overlooked and rarely mentioned. But if you knew what was hidden in its bloodlines, you'd realize this land is not ordinary. It's extraordinary, because the people here, the Somali and Afar ethnic groups, aren't just East Africans. Their DNA is proof that something happened here that defies what we thought we knew about human history. Scientists studying Djiboutian genomes made a shocking discovery. Nearly 40% of their DNA isn't African at all. Let that sink in. Almost half of their ancestry comes from an ancient Eurasian population, a population that came into Africa over 23,000 years ago. That's before farming, before writing, before civilization. And here's the twist. This isn't Arab DNA. It's not modern Middle Eastern blood. The people who brought this ancestry into Djibouti were older than Arabia itself. Their genetic signature is missing from today's Arab populations. So who were they? That's the mystery. Their trail disappears in most of the world, except here. This makes Djibouti one of the only places on Earth where their legacy survived, locked away, silently passed down from parent to child, from clan to clan, through generations. And you'd never know it, just by looking at the land. That's what makes this so unbelievable. The rocks, the roads, the sky, they're silent. But the bodies of the people? They're screaming with forgotten history. Think about that. While the rest of the world was moving out of Africa, Djibouti became a rare place where genes returned. These ancient Eurasians didn't conquer. They didn't build empires. But they merged, they blended, and they stayed. And today, their DNA lives on. The Somali man walking through a market in Djibouti City might carry genes from a ghost population that disappeared everywhere else. The Afar woman raising livestock in the mountains might be the living descendant of a migration that predates memory itself. Every cell of their body is telling a story no book has written. And maybe that's the most powerful part of all. This story was never carved into stone or written on scrolls. It was written in blood. This is not just a land with a past. This is a land where the past still breathes. Long before empires rose and fell, before borders were carved or maps even existed, a forgotten migration reshaped the future of East Africa, and no one noticed. Today, buried deep in the DNA of Djiboutians, scientists have uncovered proof of a journey that challenges everything we thought we knew. It didn't come from colonizers or conquerors. It came from an ancient population that moved silently, crossing from Eurasia into Africa nearly 23,000 years ago. Yes, you heard that right. While most human history focuses on migrations out of Africa, the people of Djibouti carry evidence of a reverse path, a genetic backflow that entered the Horn of Africa long before farming, writing, or religion were even born. These weren't Arabs, and this wasn't the spread of Islam or trade. This DNA belongs to a population that split from other Eurasians long before modern civilizations existed. Their genes don't match today's Middle Easterners. They're older, more distinct, almost like a ghost population preserved only in a few places. One of those places is Djibouti. Their DNA didn't just visit. It stayed. It mixed with East African blood and became part of the local identity, generation after generation, silently passed down like a family heirloom no one knew they had. And the question that has scientists still stunned is, how? How did these ancient Eurasians survive in the genetic memory of Djiboutians while vanishing almost everywhere else? To understand this, look at Djibouti's geography. It's more than a port. It's a passage, a natural crossing point between Arabia and Africa, a place where migrations weren't just possible, they were inevitable. But this wasn't a one-time event. This ancient backflow became part of the foundation of the region's genetic structure. Studies show that modern Somali and Afar populations, the two major ethnic groups of Djibouti, still carry up to 40% of this non-African ancestry, not as fragments, but as a core part of who they are. Even more fascinating, this ancestry didn't erase their African roots. Instead, it blended with them. A rare example of two ancient lineages meeting and becoming something new, something you won't find anywhere else on Earth. It's like two lost languages forming a third, one that only Djiboutians speak in their blood. This also explains why geneticists couldn't match parts of Djiboutian DNA with modern Middle Eastern samples. Because this isn't modern Middle Eastern ancestry, it's prehistoric. It predates agriculture. It predates the wheel. It predates the world as we know it. And here's where the story gets even stranger. The same genetic backflow appears, faintly, in parts of Ethiopia and the Horn. But in Djibouti, it shines brighter, clearer, untouched by time or modern mixing. That means the people walking through the streets of Djibouti today are among the last living carriers of a forgotten migration. A return journey no one documented, but their DNA did. So next time someone calls Djibouti small, remember this. Within its people exists a chapter of human history the textbooks forgot to mention. And now, it's finally being read. In the blistering heat of the Horn of Africa, survival never came easy. Food was scarce, water even scarcer. And yet, for generations, entire communities thrived in this unforgiving land. How? The answer might lie in a glass of milk. For the pastoralist peoples of Djibouti, the Somali and Afar, milk wasn't just nutrition. It was tradition, economy, even identity. But here's the twist. Not everyone on Earth can digest milk as an adult. In fact, most people can't. So, how did these desert-dwelling communities survive on it? Scientists digging into Djiboutian DNA found something astonishing. A rare ability to digest milk long into adulthood. It's called lactase persistence, a genetic superpower that lets your body break down lactose when others get sick from it. Now, you might assume they inherited this from the Middle East. After all, milk drinking is common there too. But that's where the story takes a sharp turn. The most famous milk digestion gene in the Arab world, known as T13910, is completely absent in Djibouti's Cushitic people. Let that sink in. Despite centuries of trade and proximity to Arabia, Djiboutians don't carry the same lactase mutation. Instead, they've developed their own unique versions like C14010, G13907, and G13915, variants found in East Africa, not the Middle East. This means their ability to drink milk evolved independently. Two populations, two deserts, same survival need, but completely different genetic solutions. And that's rare. It tells us that evolution isn't just a straight line. It's a web, full of adaptations shaped by climate, diet, and isolation. And in this case, Djiboutians didn't borrow their milk gene. They built their own. What's even more fascinating is how this shaped culture. In Afar and Somali societies, milk isn't just consumed, it's revered. Shared during weddings, given during droughts, used in rituals. Their bodies, quite literally, adapted to protect their traditions. This kind of gene-culture connection is what makes Djiboutian DNA a goldmine for researchers. It's not just about ancestry. It's about how biology and lifestyle wove together to create a blueprint for survival. Ask yourself, how many other traits might exist in this population that evolved in isolation? How many silent superpowers are still hiding in their genome? And yet, these milk genes are barely mentioned in mainstream research. While Western science celebrates European lactase evolution, the East African story remains in the shadows. But not anymore. Because now we know, Djiboutians don't just survive the desert, they've engineered themselves to thrive in it. Through genes no one expected, and stories no one thought to ask. Not all bloodlines are created equal. And in Djibouti, some clans carry secrets that scientists still can't explain. The Somali population isn't a single block. It's a living network of clans, each with its own roots, rules, and inherited patterns. From the outside, they may look united, but inside their DNA, a completely different story unfolds. One such story begins with the Diar clan, one of the oldest and most influential Somali lineages. In scientific studies, researchers found something unexpected in their Y-DNA, an extremely high frequency of haplogroup T, M184. Now here's where it gets strange. This genetic marker is rarely found in most of Africa. It's more commonly seen in parts of the Middle East, Southern Europe, and isolated groups. But in Djibouti's Dir clan, it's nearly universal. How did this happen? Did a single ancient ancestor carry this lineage into the Horn? Was there a migration that history books missed? One that left no ruins, no writings, just a silent code passed from father to son? Some subclans show almost complete fixation of this haplogroup, meaning it spread rapidly through generations, untouched by outsiders. That's more than genetics. That's a genetic legacy shaped by isolation, culture, and a deep sense of lineage pride. But the Dir aren't alone. Across Djibouti, different Somali clans show their own unique genetic fingerprints. Some carry common East African lineages, like E1B1B1, while others surprise researchers with rarer, imported-looking signatures. It's almost like each clan wrote its own genetic chapter, and together, they form a book that hasn't yet been fully read. And here's where it becomes more than just science. In Somali tradition, oral genealogies are sacred. Elders can recite their paternal lineage going back 20 or more generations. But now, modern genetics is giving those stories a new layer, not to replace them, but to enhance them. In many cases, the DNA confirms what the elders always said. But sometimes, it uncovers links and origins no one ever imagined. Like haplogroup T. Where did it truly come from? Was it part of an ancient wave that merged with local Cushitic-speaking groups? Or a founder effect, one powerful patriarch whose genes shaped an entire clan? These aren't just biological questions. They're questions about identity, heritage, and the very definition of belonging. Because when science and tradition both whisper the same name, you start to believe it. And yet, this research is still young. Comprehensive data from all Somali clans in Djibouti hasn't even been published. We're just scratching the surface. But one thing is clear. Within these clans lie blueprints of journeys that go back thousands of years. They're not just descendants of the land. They're keepers of a genetic library no one else on Earth has. And the story they hold? It's one only they can tell. Hidden deep in Djibouti's arid landscapes live the Afar, a proud, resilient people who have moved through deserts, survived droughts, and preserved a legacy older than the maps we draw today. But it's not just their culture that sets them apart. It's what flows through their blood. When researchers examined the Y chromosomes of Afar men, they stumbled upon a pattern that reached far beyond East Africa. A significant number of them carried haplogroup J1, a lineage most often associated with the Arabian Peninsula. That discovery changed everything. Because this wasn't about modern migration. These weren't recent trade links or Islamic-era influence. This connection was ancient, a genetic thread stretching across the Red Sea, quietly binding Djibouti to Arabia through blood, not boats. Imagine two shores, one African, one Arabian, and in between a narrow sea. Now imagine that sea being crossed, not once, but repeatedly, by people, stories, and genes that never made it into written history. The Afar are the evidence that those crossings happened. And not only did the genes arrive, they stayed. They mingled. They became part of a new identity. That's why the Afar carry both East African E1B1B1 and Arabian J1 P58 lineages, a rare fusion that makes them one of the few populations on Earth with this specific genetic blend. But here's what makes it even more intriguing. These Arabian signatures don't dilute their African heritage, they enhance it. The Afar still speak a Cushitic language. They still follow traditions rooted in this soil. Yet their DNA carries whispers from the other side of the sea. How do you explain a people so deeply tied to their land, yet shaped by ancient journeys across water? Could the Afar be descendants of sailors who came not for conquest, but for connection? Or was this gene flow a result of forgotten migrations, prehistoric movements when the Red Sea was not a barrier, but a bridge? What we do know is that these connections are not random. Genetic clustering places the Afar closer to Near Eastern populations than to many of their East African neighbors. Their DNA points to cross-continental interaction that likely predates language, empire, and memory. And this isn't just theory. YSDR data, the most detailed forensic markers used in population genetics, shows significant overlap between Afar lineages and those found in Yemen and parts of southern Arabia. This is not just a hint. It's a genetic fingerprint. It means the Afar aren't just rooted in Djibouti. They're the living proof of a forgotten maritime world, one where people didn't just trade goods, they exchanged genes. This connection may also explain aspects of their physical traits, social systems, and even resistance to certain environmental stressors, shaped, perhaps, by centuries of blended ancestry and desert survival. And yet, these findings are rarely discussed. While the world focuses on ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Afar remain largely unstudied, their genetic story buried under assumptions and silence. But not anymore, because now we know that DNA is a map, and that map points across the sea, into the heart of ancient Arabia and back again. The Afar are not just descendants of the Horn, they are its bridge to something far older and far wider than we ever imagined. In the genetic map of East Africa, borders don't exist. The DNA doesn't care where one country ends and another begins, because long before flags and frontiers, there was only movement, memory, and shared blood. When scientists examined the genomes of people across the Horn of Africa, Somali, Oromo, Amhara, Ethiopian Jews, they noticed something remarkable. Despite speaking different languages, practicing different religions, and living under different governments, their genetic signatures pointed to a common source. It's like looking at different rivers and realizing they all spring from the same underground well. Djiboutians, particularly the Somali clans like Isa and Gadabursi, fall directly into this shared genetic zone. Their DNA doesn't isolate them. It connects them, not just to nearby Ethiopians, but to a regional ancestry that runs deeper than political boundaries. What does that mean? It means these populations weren't built in isolation. They evolved together, shaped by the same migrations, the same pressures, the same ancient events that ripple through their genes even today. One such component is known as Ethio-Somali ancestry, a unique blend found in Cushitic and Semitic speakers in the Horn. This isn't borrowed from Arabia or stitched from colonial threads. It's native, deeply rooted, and older than agriculture itself. And here's what makes it even more compelling. This ancestry carries echoes from both North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, forming a kind of genetic triangle that centers right around Djibouti. It's as if the region was always meant to be a meeting point, a convergence zone, not just of people, but of genes. This shared origin also shows up in their adaptations. Similar immune responses, similar skin tone genes, even similar metabolism traits, clues that these communities faced the same environmental challenges and responded in near-identical ways. But if the DNA is so close, why do we treat these populations as separate? Why are genetic studies still divided by nationality when the genes themselves are telling us a different story? Because somewhere along the way, we began to believe that culture and language must always match biology. But the Horn of Africa doesn't play by those rules. In Djibouti, Ethiopia, and surrounding areas, languages have shifted. Empires have come and gone. But the DNA, it remembers. And what it remembers is a time when these people were one. So the next time someone says, Somali, Oromo, Amhara, they're all different, the genome quietly responds, not as different as you think. Their bodies are carrying the same instructions written thousands of years ago, in the same soil, under the same sun. This is what makes Djibouti so vital. It's not just a nation. It's a living chapter of a larger regional story, one that stretches across valleys and borders, connecting people who may have forgotten just how much they once shared. Some places shape their people. Others demand they evolve or vanish. Djibouti belongs to the second kind. In this land where heat blisters the horizon and the wind carries more dust than mercy, survival was never just about strength. It was about adaptation, down to the very last strand of DNA. And when scientists began decoding the genetic signatures of Djiboutians, they found traits that weren't just unusual. They were tactical responses to centuries of environmental war. Start with disease. Malaria isn't just a mosquito bite here. It's a historical predator, silent, deadly, relentless. And over generations, the bodies of Djiboutians learned to fight back. One of the clearest signs is the Duffinol mutation, a genetic trait that blocks certain malaria parasites from entering red blood cells. It's nature's lock on a door that death was trying to open. And that's just the beginning. Their immune system carries alleles fine-tuned by centuries of exposure. HLA gene frequencies, the backbone of immune defense, have shifted over time in Djibouti's populations to better resist regional infections. These aren't accidental mutations. They're signatures of a genome under siege and winning. But disease wasn't the only battle. In this region, even the sun could be your enemy. Dehydration, salt loss, heat stress, these aren't once-a-year challenges. They're part of daily life. And over time, Djiboutian bodies began making quiet adjustments. Genes related to water retention, salt balance, and thermoregulation show specific patterns in populations of the Horn. It's almost as if their DNA learned how to ration energy like a camel, silently, efficiently, without pause. And let's not forget nutrition. With unpredictable food supplies, survival meant making the most of every calorie. Variants linked to lipid metabolism, like certain forms of the APO gene, appear frequently in Djiboutians, potentially fine-tuned to store energy and recover faster from scarcity. These same variants are studied for their role in cholesterol and Alzheimer's in the West, but here, they might have started as desert adaptations. And yet, we rarely talk about this. While scientists spotlight high-altitude adaptations in Tibet or lactose tolerance in Europe, the genetic brilliance of desert survival is often left unmentioned. Why? Because it's subtle. No dramatic physical trait. No glowing mutation. Just small, smart edits that kept people alive, one scorching season after another. Imagine being shaped by fire and thirst, not just culture. Imagine having DNA that doesn't just remember disease, it predicts it. That's what Djiboutians carry. They're not just people of the desert. They're blueprints of how to outlast it. And the next time someone asks what makes this region so unique, don't point to the landscape. Point to the genes. Because in Djibouti, evolution didn't wait for permission. It moved silently, with purpose. And it left behind a population that isn't just surviving. They're genetically trained to win. In the world of global genetics, some nations shine under a microscope. Others remain in the dark, their secrets waiting in silence. Djibouti is one of those shadows. Despite sitting at one of the most critical crossroads in human history, Djibouti has been largely ignored by international genome research. And that silence is not just unfortunate, it's a missed opportunity. Only a handful of studies have scratched the surface of Djiboutian genetics. Most focus on Arab minorities or broader East African averages. But the majority populations, the Somali clans, the Afar groups, remain genetically invisible to most of the world. And yet, the little we do know is extraordinary. Founder effects, rare haplogroups, unique adaptations, layered ancestries. Every clue screams, dig deeper. But funding doesn't come. Focus shifts elsewhere. Why? Because small countries often get sidelined. Because research is driven by visibility, not just value. And because genetic data is political, what gets studied often reflects who holds power, not who holds mystery. Even major databases like the Human Genome Diversity Project or 1000 Genomes have glaring gaps. Djibouti isn't just underrepresented, it's practically missing. But here's the twist. Absence doesn't mean emptiness. It means potential. The few datasets we have, like limited samples from the Qatar Genome Project, show that Djiboutian Arabs carry distinct signatures, not found elsewhere in the Gulf. Even that sliver proves there's something unique happening here. So what would happen if we finally studied Djibouti at full depth? How many overlooked adaptations would emerge? How many new migration paths would be revealed? Could this tiny nation reshape our understanding of how genes moved, how people survived, and how civilizations emerged? One thing is certain, silence doesn't mean simplicity. It means the story hasn't been told yet. Djibouti's genome isn't empty. It's waiting. Every genome carries echoes from the past. But some carry voices that no longer have faces. In West Africa, researchers uncovered ghost DNA, traces of a now-extinct human population that once walked the earth, then vanished without a name. Could Djibouti hold a similar secret? This land sits at one of the oldest human migration crossroads. And the deeper scientists go into the genomes of Horn populations, the more anomalies they uncover, fragments of ancestry that don't cleanly match any modern population. These aren't just minor glitches. They're hints of archaic admixture, possible interbreeding with now-extinct hominin groups, long before Homo sapiens became global. Think about that. It means Djiboutians may be carrying fragments of a species that's no longer alive anywhere else. A lost branch of humanity, woven into their blood. The signal is faint, but it's there. Unusual combinations of alleles, genetic distances that don't fit with known patterns, even adaptations that seem over-engineered, like traits for surviving intense dehydration or resisting rare pathogens. Could these be gifts from a forgotten lineage? We already know the Denisovans and Neanderthals left traces in Asia and Europe, but Africa's archaic puzzle is still being assembled. And Djibouti, overlooked, understudied, might be the missing corner piece. If so, it changes everything. It means the story of human origins isn't linear. It's layered, complex, full of voices we've never heard, but might still be listening through our bones. And in Djibouti, those voices haven't vanished. They've just gone quiet. Some genetic discoveries are local. Others rewrite global science. Djibouti's DNA might just do both. Because what lives in this small nation's genome isn't just ancestral history. It's a model, a living code of how human beings adapt, evolve, and endure. By studying Djiboutians, researchers can trace how different ancestral streams merge, how isolated lineages evolve under pressure, and how environment and culture shape genetic expression over time. This population isn't a relic. It's a biological blueprint. It can teach us about metabolic resilience in extreme climates, immune gene flexibility under pathogen-heavy environments, rare haplogroups that help unlock ancient migration routes, and the impact of cultural continuity on long-term genetic stability. But there's more. In a world facing climate shifts, food insecurity, and new diseases, Djiboutian DNA is a manual for survival. The same genes that help them thrive in arid, resource-scarce conditions may hold solutions for future global crises. That's not speculation. That's the promise of genomics. And yet, this treasure is barely being explored. What if the key to understanding disease resistance in Africa lies here? What if the next breakthrough in genetic medicine starts in a place no one's looking? Djibouti isn't just a story. It's a signal. And for those willing to listen, it speaks volumes. Science is powerful, but without ethics, it's dangerous. As interest in African genetics grows, so does the risk of exploitation. And Djibouti, with its rich but unprotected genome, stands at a crossroads. We've seen what happens when research moves faster than responsibility. Blood samples taken without consent, data sold without communities even knowing, discoveries made and never shared with the people they came from. That can't happen here. If Djiboutian DNA is to be studied, it must be done the right way, with informed consent, with local partnerships, with cultural respect. The communities must be participants, not subjects. That means sharing findings, translating results, empowering local scientists, building infrastructure that lasts long after the research ends. And above all, remembering, these aren't just data points. They're people, with histories, beliefs, and rights. Organizations like H3 Africa have laid out strong frameworks. UNESCO has provided ethical roadmaps. But those documents only matter if we apply them, especially in places like Djibouti, where regulation is still catching up to reality. Because the truth is, science can reveal, but it can also erase if we don't listen. So let's get this right. Let's explore Djibouti's DNA with care, curiosity, and conscience. Not just for discovery, but for justice.